My name is Isabella Morgan, 28 years old. That night, I walked into my parents' 30th wedding anniversary party, clutching an album I'd spent weeks making by hand. I wasn't invited. A last-minute text from my aunt told me about the celebration at the ice rink, and I just showed up, even though I knew I didn't belong. Music filled the air, lights glimmered across the frozen floor. My sister was the center of attention, her arm looped around my mom's as they laughed. My dad stood nearby, taking photos, his smile shining brighter than the rink's neon glow. I stood at the edge, holding my album filled with memories I'd collected years. I'd quietly held this family together without anyone ever noticing. No one waved. No one called my name. I was invisible like always. Then my mom lifted her glass, her voice cutting through the chatter. Let's toast to the only child who has truly made us proud. Everyone turned toward my sister, clapping and cheering. My chest tightened. The air felt heavy. I stood my chair, scraping against the icy floor, and whispered, I understand. I walked away, each step heavier than the last, until a deep voice rose from behind me. Isabella, wait. Stay for 30 seconds and tell them what you've done. The rink fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. I froze, heart pounding, knowing the truth I'd buried for years was about to surface. If it were you, what would you do if your own family acted like you didn't exist? Share your thoughts in the comments, I really want to know. That night, amid the shimmering glow of our family's celebration, I realized their happiness had never had a place for me. I stood by the rink's edge, my hands empty now, the album I'd crafted for my parents' 30th anniversary left on the gift table. No chair had my name, no reserved spot, just a stack of plastic chairs in the corner, cold and scratched. I grabbed one, its legs scraping the floor, and set it near the rink, far from the family's laughter. My sister Jennifer was the center of it all, her voice cutting through the music as she recounted her latest triumph, a major advertising deal with a sports brand. She's a star, my aunt said, her hands clapping while my uncle raised his glass, nodding eagerly. The crowd echoed their cheers, drowning out the rink's hum, their eyes fixed on Jennifer. I sat invisible, my chest tight, the weight of being overlooked pressing down. Vanessa, Jennifer's best friend, skated over, her balance shaky. It's rough, isn't it? Being sidelined like that, she said, her voice low, eyes flickering with brief sympathy. I nodded, a spark of hope for connection, but she turned away, shouting, Jennifer, tell us about the photo shoot. Her words hit like a slap, loyalty's clear. Jennifer laughed, describing her pitch to the brand, her confidence polished, unaware it was built on my late-night tutoring sessions for her college presentations. My mother leaned closer, hanging on Jennifer's every word, her smile wide, oblivious to me, sitting alone. My father, camera in hand, focused on Jennifer, snapping photos as she posed with friends, his lens never turning my way. His silence stung louder than the crowd's applause. I shifted in my creaking chair, memories flooding back, years of comparisons where Jennifer's charm always eclipsed my efforts. At family dinners, my mother would say, "Why can't you be more outgoing like her?" while my father stayed quiet, eyes on his plate. I'd graduated early, landed a finance job, but it was never enough. Jennifer's prom queen crown, her viral social media posts. Those were the wins they celebrated. The rink's chill seeped into my skin, mirroring the coldness I felt from them. Vanessa skated back to Jennifer, her laughter blending with the crowd's, leaving me isolated again. My aunt caught my eye, offering a fleeting smile, but it vanished as she turned to toast Jennifer. My male cousin, standing nearby, chatted with my female cousin, their voices lost in the music, unaware of the years I'd carried this family. Jennifer's story about her ad campaign grew louder, her hands waving, drawing every gaze. I remembered the night she'd called, panicked, needing help with her portfolio. I'd stayed up until dawn refining her work, sending it off without a thank you. She never mentioned my help, not to me, not to them. My father adjusted his camera, capturing Jennifer's grin, while my mother clapped, her pride radiant. My male cousin laughed at something Jennifer said, joining the crowd's admiration, while my female cousin nodded along, sipping her drink. I traced the rough edge of my chair, the plastic biting my fingers, my heart heavy with years of being unseen. The party pulsed around me, vibrant, loud, but I was a shadow, my truth buried deep. I'd grown used to being forgotten at family gatherings, but tonight, their words made it impossible to bear. The DJ paused the music, and my mother Helen raised her glass, beaming with pride. The rink lights cast a soft glow on her face as she stood beside my father Michael, their hands clasped, their smiles wide. Tonight, Helen began, her voice carrying over the crowd. We celebrate not just our 30th anniversary, but the child who has made this family truly proud, Jennifer. My father nodded, lifting his glass higher, his eyes fixed on Jennifer, who stood near the rink's center, basking in the spotlight. Her advertising deal is proof of her brilliance. He added, his voice, warm, unwavering. The crowd erupted in applause, hands clapping, glasses clinking, all eyes on Jennifer as she smiled, her cheeks flushed with triumph. I stood by the water cooler, my fingers gripping the edge of the counter, unnoticed, my heart sinking under the weight of their words. The sting of being erased burned deeper than I expected. The cheers grew louder, family and friends turning to Jennifer, their laughter filling the rink. My aunt raised her glass, calling out, "To Jennifer's success." My uncle echoed, his voice booming, while my male cousin and female cousin joined the toast, their smiles mirroring the crowd's. Vanessa, Jennifer's best friend, clapped hardest, shouting, "You're unstoppable." I stood frozen, my breath shallow, the noise around me a blur. Their words, "the child who has made us proud," echoed in my head, each syllable a knife. I'd spent years holding this family together, but here I was, nothing. My mother's eyes never left Jennifer, her pride unmistakable, while my father's camera flashed, capturing every moment of her glory. I pushed away from the counter, my legs heavy, and stood up, the chair scraping behind me. "Understand?" I said, my voice sharp, cutting through the din. The word hung in the air, cold and final, as I turned toward the exit. My steps echoed on the rink's wooden floor, each one a declaration of enough. The crowd's chatter faltered, a few heads turning, but I didn't look back. My mother's smile wavered, her glass still raised, while Jennifer's eyes flickered with confusion, her hands pausing mid-gesture. My father lowered his camera, his expression unreadable, but he didn't speak. I reached for the door, my heart pounding, ready to leave this behind, until my grandfather Harold stood up, his chair creaking loudly. "Isabella, wait." Harold called, his voice deep, commanding, slicing through the rink's hum. "Stay for 30 seconds and tell them what you've done." The room fell silent, glasses frozen in midair, every eye now on me. My aunt gasped, her hand covering her mouth, while my uncle leaned forward, his brow furrowed. My male cousin whispered something to my female cousin, their faces tense, sensing the shift. Jennifer's smile faded, her hands dropping to her sides, her confidence cracking. Vanessa stepped back. Her applause stilled, her eyes darting between us. My mother's glass trembled, her pride replaced by unease, while my father's gaze finally met mine, uncertain, searching. I stood rooted, my pulse racing, the truth I'd buried for years, clawing its way to the surface. The rink felt smaller, the air thick with tension, every face waiting for what I'd say next. I took a step forward, my hands trembling, the weight of years unspoken pressing against my chest. "You want to know what I've done?" I said, my voice low but firm, cutting through the tension. "Let's start with Jennifer's college tuition." The rink seemed to shrink, every gaze fixed on me. I faced Jennifer, who stood frozen, her smile gone. "I paid for your advertising degree." I said, my words deliberate. "Every cent." I worked 2 jobs, nights at a diner, weekends, freelancing spreadsheets to cover it. The crowd murmured, heads turning, eyes wide with surprise. I didn't stop. "And that big ad deal, everyone's praising." I continued, my voice rising steady. "I called in a favor from a creative director I met at a finance conference. I pitched your portfolio, Jennifer got you that first contract with the sports brand. Helen stepped forward, her glass still in hand, her face tight. That's not true, she said, her voice sharp but shaky, lacking conviction. Jennifer earned that deal herself, her talent, her drive. The crowd shifted, whispers growing louder, some nodding toward Helen, others glancing at me, uncertain. Helen's denial hung in the air, fragile, unconvincing, her eyes darting to Jennifer, who looked down, her hands twisting together, her confidence unraveling. Vanessa stood near Jennifer, silent for once, her usual chatter gone. Her eyes widened, flickering with shock, no longer praising Jennifer's success. She stepped back, blending into the crowd, her earlier enthusiasm replaced by unease. My cousin Scott leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Wait," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "I saw Isabella send money through a banking app years ago, late at night." Scott nodded, his memory clear, his words landing like a stone. The crowd's whispers grew, eyes shifting between me and Jennifer, the air thick with doubt. My aunt tilted her head, her expression softening, while my uncle crossed his arms, his gaze narrowing at Helen. My female cousin sipped her drink, her eyes locked on me, curious, waiting. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, the memories flooding back. "I worked 16-hour days," I said, my voice unwavering. "I'd come home at midnight, my hands aching from typing, my feet sore from waitressing, just to make sure Jennifer could study without loans." I looked at Helen, her face pale, her denial crumbling. "You never asked where the money came from?" I said, my tone sharp. "You just assumed it was yours to spend." Michael stood silent, his camera now at his side, his eyes flickering with something, guilt maybe, or realization. He didn't speak, but his stillness spoke volumes, his earlier pride in Jennifer fading. The rink's lights flickered, casting shadows across the crowd, the tension palpable. I remembered the nights I'd spent calculating budgets, scraping together every dollar for Jennifer's tuition. I'd skipped meals, worn the same coat for years, all to give her a chance. And the creative director, I'd stayed late at that conference, pitching Jennifer's work when I could have networked for my own career. I'd handed her the opportunity, but she'd taken the spotlight. Harold nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine, his presence grounding me. "Go on," he said, his voice low, encouraging. The crowd leaned in, their glasses forgotten, their attention mine for the first time. Jennifer's face flushed, her hands still twisting, her eyes avoiding mine. I didn't know, she mumbled, her voice barely audible, her usual confidence shattered. Helen stepped closer, her voice rising. "You're exaggerating," she said. But her tone wavered, her eyes darting to the crowd, seeking support that wasn't there. Scott shook his head, his voice firm. "I remember that app transfer," he said again, his words heavier now, backing me up. My aunt whispered something to my uncle, her expression troubled, while my female cousin set her glass down, her gaze steady on me, no longer neutral. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, the truth sinking in cracks, forming in the perfect image they'd built around Jennifer. I stood taller, my voice steady, the weight of silence lifting. "I didn't do it for praise," I said, looking at Jennifer, then Helen. "I did it because I thought family meant sacrifice." The words hung heavy, the rink silent except for the faint hum of the ice machine. Helen's hands shook her glass, nearly slipping, her denial exposed. Michael's eyes met mine, but he said nothing, his silence a confession of its own. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, her shock clear, her loyalty to Jennifer wavering. Harold's gaze remained fixed, his nod subtle but firm, urging me to keep going. The truth was out raw and undeniable, and the room felt different now, charged, waiting for what came next. The rink lights dimmed slightly, but the spotlight was on me now. Harold stood firm, my voice steady, his nod pushing me forward. The crowd's murmurs faded, their eyes locked on me, waiting. "You think that was all I said?" My gaze shifting to Michael, whose camera hung limp at his side. "Let me tell you about the $40,000 I paid for your medical bills." The room gasped, a collective intake of breath, the air thick with shock. "After your kidney surgery, Dad," I continued, my voice clear, I covered every bill $40,000 to keep this family from falling apart. I kept it quiet so you wouldn't worry so you could focus on healing. Michael's eyes widened, his hands trembling, his silence louder than any apology. I didn't stop there. And Chicago? I said, my voice rising sharp. I turned down a job offer there, a senior finance role, 6 figures to stay in Detroit to keep supporting this family. The crowd shifted, whispers rippling through, some shaking their heads, others staring at Michael. My Aunt Cynthia stepped forward, her face pale, her voice soft. "Why didn't you say anything, Isabella?" She asked, her tone genuine, her eyes searching mine. Before I could answer, Helen cut in, her voice shrill. "She's exaggerating." Helen said, her hands waving dismissively, her words hollow. "You're making this up to steal the spotlight." Her accusation stung, but it lacked strength, her eyes darting nervously, betraying her doubt. I shook my head, my resolve hardening. "Exaggerating," I said, my tone cutting. I spent nights freelancing tax forms, budgets, data entry until my eyes burned just to cover those bills. I looked at the crowd, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief, some leaning closer, others glancing at Helen. "I'd work until 3 in the morning," I said, my voice steady. My laptop overheating, my coffee cold, all to make sure this family stayed afloat. I turned to Michael, his face ashen, his hands gripping the camera like a lifeline. "You never asked where the money came from?" I said, my words heavy. "You just accepted it?" "Assumed it was there." My cousin Rebecca stood near the rink's edge, her drink forgotten in her hand. I saw her. Rebecca muttered, her voice low but clear, cutting through the tension. Late at night, her laptop glowing in the living room, working when everyone else was asleep. Her words landed softly, but they carried weight, heads turning toward her, then back to me. The crowd's murmurs grew, the truth sinking deeper, cracks widening in the family's facade. Cynthia nodded, her expression troubled, her earlier question unanswered. My uncle stood beside her, his arms crossed, his brow furrowed, his silence a quiet acknowledgement of my words. Helen's face tightened, her hands clenched, her denial unraveling. "You're twisting things," she said, her voice weaker now, her eyes avoiding mine. Jennifer stood silent, her head bowed, her earlier confidence gone, her hands still at her sides. Harold leaned back in his chair, his eyes steady, his presence a quiet anchor. The rink felt smaller, the air heavy with the weight of my truth. I remembered those nights, my fingers cramped from typing, my back aching from hours at the desk, my savings drained to keep Michael healthy, to keep this family together. I'd sacrificed my own dreams, my own future for them, but they'd never seen it. The crowd's eyes stayed on me, some wide with shock, others narrowed with doubt, but none could look away. Michael's gaze dropped, his camera now a burden, his silence a confession of his ignorance. Cynthia's question hung in the air, unanswered, her concern genuine but too late. Rebecca's admission echoed, her voice soft but firm, a small validation of my unseen efforts. Helen's denial faltered, her words losing power, her authority slipping. I stood tall, my heart pounding, the truth raw and exposed. The rink's hum was the only sound, the crowd holding its breath, waiting for what came next. I stepped closer, my voice steady, my heart pounding. "You've always favored Jennifer," I said, my words sharp, cutting through the hush. "When I graduated college, early top of my class, you told me I wasn't good enough, said I lacked her spark." Helen's face paled, her lips parting, but no words came. The memory burned, her standing in our living room, her voice cold, dismissing my degree while praising Jennifer's pageant wins. The crowd shifted, some glancing at Helen, others at me, their whispers a low hum. I didn't stop. "And the family, money," I said, my voice rising firm. "I saw you transfer it to a private account. Mom, money meant for all of us funneled into Jennifer's ad campaigns." The crowd gasped, heads turning, eyes wide with shock. My Uncle James stepped forward, his face tight. "Helen, is this true?" James asked, his voice low, urgent, his arms uncrossed now, demanding answers. Helen's eyes darted to him, then away, her hands clutching her glass. It's private family business, she said, her tone evasive, her words stumbling. You wouldn't understand. Her deflection hung weak, unconvincing, the crowd's murmurs growing louder, their doubt palpable. I held my ground. My gaze locked on Helen. Private? I said, my tone sharp. I saw the bank notification on your phone last week. $15,000 moved to an account tied to Jennifer's agency. The crowd's whispers turned to gasps, glasses forgotten, eyes fixed on me. I remembered that moment, Helen leaving her phone on the kitchen counter, the notification flashing, my heart sinking, as I realized where our family's savings went. That money was for emergencies. I said, my voice steady, for Dad's medical bills, for our home, not for billboards with Jennifer's face. Helen flinched, her face flushed, her authority crumbling. James shook his head, his voice rising. Helen, explain this. He said, his tone sharper now, his eyes narrowing. Cynthia stood beside him, her expression troubled, her hands clasped tightly. Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes locked on Helen, her earlier neutrality gone. Scott crossed his arms. His brow furrowed, his silence heavy with judgment. Jennifer stood near the rink's edge, her head bowed, her hands limp, her usual confidence absent. She didn't speak, didn't defend herself. Her silence louder than any protest. Vanessa hovered nearby, her lips pressed tight, her earlier chatter gone, her eyes avoiding mine. Harold sat steady, his gaze unwavering, his nod subtle but firm, urging me on. Michael stood frozen, his camera forgotten. His eyes flickering with something, guilt perhaps, or shame. The rink's lights cast long shadows, the tension thick. The crowd's murmurs a constant hum. I remembered the years of being overlooked, my efforts buried under Jennifer's spotlight. My sacrifices ignored. I didn't want to shame you, I said, my voice low, directed at Helen. But you forced this, pretending I was invisible, pretending Jennifer did it all alone. The crowd's eyes stayed on me, some nodding, others whispering the truth, sinking in, undeniable. Helen's hands trembled, her glass nearly slipping, her voice barely a whisper. You're twisting everything, she said, but her words lacked strength, her eyes darting to the crowd, seeking support that wasn't there. James stepped closer, his voice firm. No. Helen, answer me, where did that money go? He pressed, his tone unyielding. The crowd leaned in their whispers, now a low roar, the rink feeling smaller, the air heavy. Jennifer's head stayed bowed, her silence a confession of its own. I stood tall, my heart racing, the weight of years unspoken, finally lifting the truth raw and exposed, the family's facade shattered. The ice seemed to crack under the weight of the truth. Harold stood slowly, his presence commanding, his voice steady. I locked the family account, Harold said, his words cutting through the rink's silence. When I found out Helen's plan to divert funds for Jennifer's campaigns, I froze it to protect what's left. The crowd gasped, heads turning, eyes wide with shock. James nodded, his jaw tight, while Cynthia covered her mouth, her gaze flickering to Helen. Rebecca leaned forward, her expression stunned, while Scott crossed his arms, his silence heavy. The rink felt smaller, the air charged, the family's facade crumbling further. Michael stepped forward, his camera dangling, his face ashen. I knew, Michael said, his voice low, trembling, the admission slicing through the tension. I knew about your help, Isabella, the medical bills, the sacrifices. But I stayed quiet, afraid of fighting with Helen. His eyes met mine, filled with regret, his hands shaking. The crowd's murmurs grew, some shaking their heads, others staring at him, their disappointment palpable. I felt a pang in my chest. His words a mix of relief and betrayal, he'd seen my efforts yet chosen silence, letting Helen's favoritism fester. I took a deep breath, my resolve hardening. I'm done. I said, my voice clear, unwavering, directed at the family. I can't keep sacrificing for people who don't value me. The words hung heavy, the crowd froze in their glasses, forgotten. I've given everything, my time, my money, my dreams, but I'm not invisible anymore. I looked at Helen, then Jennifer, my heart heavy but firm. I'm cutting ties, walking away from this family that never saw me. The rink's hum was the only sound, the weight of my decision sinking in the crowd's eyes locked on me, some nodding, others stunned. Jennifer stepped forward, her head no longer, bowed, her voice shaky. "Isabella, I'm sorry," she said, her eyes glistening, her hands reaching out. I didn't mean to take everything." Her words faltered, her usual confidence gone, but I shook my head, my voice cold. "Your apology comes too late." I said, my tone final. "The truth can't undo years of being overlooked." Jennifer's face fell, her hands dropping, her silence a confession of her part in this. Vanessa stood nearby, her lips pressed tight, her earlier chatter absent, her eyes avoiding mine, her loyalty to Jennifer irrelevant now. Helen's face twisted, her anger flaring. "You're tearing this family apart." She spat, her voice sharp, her glass slamming onto a nearby table. Without another word, Helen turned, her heels clicking on the rink's wooden floor, and stormed toward the exit. The crowd watched silent as she disappeared through the doors, leaving a void behind. Michael stood frozen, his eyes on the ground, his admission still echoing. James and Cynthia exchanged glances, their faces troubled, while Rebecca and Scott remained still, their expressions a mix of shock and understanding. Harold sat back, his nod subtle, his eyes steady, approving my stand. The rink's lights flickered, the silence heavy, the family fractured. I stood tall, my heart racing, the weight of years lifted, replaced by a new resolve. The crowd's whispers faded, their eyes still on me, some with sympathy, others with unease. I'd laid bare the truth, exposed the favoritism, and chosen myself for the first time. The ice stretched out before me, cold and vast, a mirror of the distance I'd now set between me and this family. The party was over, the celebration hollow, and I knew my next step was out that door toward a life no longer defined by their neglect. I walked out into the Detroit night, the rink lights fading behind me. The cold air hit my face sharp and freeing as I left the family I'd once poured everything into. Weeks later, I packed my bags and moved to Chicago, a city buzzing with possibility, far from the weight of their expectations. I landed a job in finance, senior analyst, a role I'd earned through years of grit, my desk overlooking the skyline, my evenings filled with new faces, new dreams. For the first time, I lived for myself, unburdened, my days no longer defined by their needs, my nights no longer heavy with their neglect. Chicago's pulse became my own, each step a reminder I'd chosen freedom. Back in Detroit, Helen faced the fallout. With the family account locked by Harold, her investments for Jennifer's campaigns collapsed, her plans unraveling like thread. Relatives turned cold, their whispers sharp. James and Cynthia no longer invited her to gatherings, their trust broken by her secret transfers. Rebecca later told me Helen's calls went unanswered, her apologies ignored, her reputation among kin shattered. She'd built her world on favoring Jennifer, but now with the truth exposed, she stood alone, her authority gone, her pride a hollow shell. Jennifer's world crumbled too. The truth about her ad deal, my role in securing it, spread like wildfire across early social media platforms, posts and forums buzzing with the story. Her agency dropped her the big sports brand contract, vanishing, her name no longer a shining star, but a cautionary tale. Scott mentioned seeing her at a local cafe, her confidence gone, her eyes scanning for recognition that never came. She'd relied on the spotlight I'd handed her, but without it, she faltered, her success exposed as borrowed, her fame fleeting. One evening, as I sat in my Chicago apartment, my phone lit up with a message from Rebecca. "Isabella, we were wrong." Rebecca wrote, her words raw, direct. "The family failed you, I failed you. I'm sorry." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering, the words stirring memories of her quiet nods at the rink. She'd seen my late-night work, spoken up when it mattered, but it wasn't enough to bridge the years of silence. I set the phone down, unanswered, my heart steady but unmoved. Her apology, like Jennifer's, came too late, a gesture unable to undo the past. Looking back, I learned something vital. Self-respect matters more than validation from those who don't value you. I'd spent years sacrificing money dreams, time for a family that looked past me, but in walking away, I found my worth. Chicago taught me to build a life on my terms, to seek people who see me, not just what I can give. The tributes to Jennifer, the years of being invisible, they're behind me now, a chapter closed. I'm not defined by their neglect, but by the strength I found to leave it. Thanks for staying with my story. What would you do? Comment below.